Welcome to Movie and a Beer, everybody. This is Dan bringing us in, and we have an amazingly fun and groovy episode that's flashing back to the 80s with a special, awesome guest host. And, well, before I get into anything further, let's do some introductions.
Hey, dear listeners, thank you for joining us. I am Aaron. I was alive when this movie was released, and I knew nothing about it until a scant, 4 hours ago.
My name is Eric. I'm completely new to podcasting. I introduced the movie to all these fine gentlemen. I watched it back in the early 90s.
And I'm Brian, everyone. Tonight, I'm your expert on rioting in L.A.
Oh, now I wish I had an expert.
Why? You live there, though, right?
Yes, I was in L.A. for 20 years of my life, and I'm well familiar with the Miracle Mile.
And the rioting that occurred there during the Rodney King riots?
And the rioting that occurred there 4 years after this film was made. This film is Miracle Mile.
Yes, and it was made it was released it takes place
1988.
In 1988, but it came out in 1989. And
What?
It stars Anthony Edwards and Mare Winningham as the two characters who, by chance, meet at the La Brea Tar Pits, kind of, what is it, a museum or a
It's a
historical
museum
center?
and historical area, a place where they've found many dinosaur and woolly mammoth bones stuck in the tar.
Yeah. And so they kind of be like, hey, let's hook up, but I have to go work because she works at a diner that's not far from it.
Wait, so this whole movie is their first date?
It is. It's a horrible first date.
Wow.
Well,
Kind of their second date, and she says meet her at midnight when she gets off her waitress shift.
Yeah.
At quarter after midnight, yeah.
And he oversleeps because the power goes off.
Well, he was smoking, and then he decided, I think, to quit smoking, and he flung his cigarette, and then a pigeon took it, put it on their nest, which was on the power lines.
And then the power lines were on fire. The hotel lost
So-
power. He
so
overslept for his
serendipity.
date.
Yeah.
So he went to pick her up for their midnight date at 3:45 a.m.
Yep.
And missed her.
And needless to say, the movie doesn't do a real time. Like we don't.
No.
There are time gaps, but
This is not
really-
24. Yeah.
It's not 24. It's not real time. I don't think that really existed at this moment in filmmaking and TV. But we did also have a couple of beers.
It was
which we will-
close to the runtime of the movie from the
Yeah.
time when the bombs are supposed to hit.
Yes. We had a Hetty Alice in Gold Dot Collab Fest beer and the Checkered Flannel Brown from Mount Tabor. We acquired these at a nearby establishment called Bottles and Cans, and we'll talk about that a bit later in the podcast. Thoughts on movies from the late 80s?
Well, let me just say...
Tangerine Dream. Oh my
Tangerine
God.
Dream was not a movie. That was a band from the 70s. But let's talk about the movie.
Finish the
premise.
synopsis first.
Yeah.
the
So,
premise.
dear listener, we have... This is a high-stakes catastrophe romance. I guess is maybe the genre?
Doomsday.
Sure.
A doomsday romance, right?
Yeah.
So our protagonist, Harry, gets a misplaced phone call directed to him where he receives...
After he misses the date.
After he misses the date, with Julie, was it? Julie?
Yes,
Julie.
Julie
Thank you.
Peters.
Kind of the second date where it was all going to come together and
Right. Real connection, a real
the
spark.
romance was going to take off.
The chemistry was so chemical. This misplaced phone call where he has this... I'm going to spoil a little bit, but I won't spoil everything. I hope you know.
Oh, why not? The movie's really old.
It is, but we want our listeners to enjoy this film also.
It's 35 years old.
All right, Dan. But so he gets this bit of intel about an incoming nuclear attack, and that basically LA is going to be targeted. Everything he knows is going to be destroyed, and he has this choice to make, where he can choose to exit, or he can try and rescue this woman he went on a date with, 3 hours before, who he's completely infatuated with because she went to the Tar Museum on the day that he went to the Tar Museum, and evidently
Randomly talked to some children who she was chaperoning.
was she
Sort of.
I thought
I don't know.
she
She was
chaperoning
kind of
them?
along for the ride. I don't know. She was just randomly there
Hard to
too.
say.
Two
No, 'cause
random
she's-
people there.
Yeah, because she's a
She's
waitress
a
at the
She's not
coffee
a
shop.
teacher,
so-
but there was a bunch of students there, and she was just hanging out with the students.
This was a very nebulous meet and greet.
It was a
Right,
time in history when you could talk to strangers' children in museums and not
and not get
And
arrested.
not get arrested.
in
Yeah.
LA.
Yeah,
Especially in LA.
so it was an implied meet cute.
yeah.
Yeah, it was, and these ambient children who belong to nobody Sorry, Eric. I think
Well,
I
it was
hit
the
my-
80s. I would have been in a museum on my own then, too.
I suppose a different time, a different
Yeah.
generation, a safer
Latchkey
world.
kids, man.
Except for the threat of nuclear annihilation.
It wasn't actually safer. We just didn't think about it. We just didn't care.
Just didn't care.
We didn't
Yeah.
have all the information that we have. Anyhow, so there was a meet cute at the La Brea Natural History Museum.
Yeah,
where,
the Page Museum of Natural History.
okay. So it was legitimately, and that was my expertise then, Dan. I'm the
Yes.
expert of natural history museums.
Yes.
So
'Cause
there.
you've seen them all.
I've seen several, but yeah.
close
So they
enough.
meet there, and he decides rather than trying to run away from LA on his own, he's going to rescue Julie
'Cause she needs rescuing.
because she needs rescue.
She doesn't know about the imminent annihilation.
Nobody else knows about the imminent annihilation except for the people that happen to be in this cafe where the date was meant to start.
Yep.
And so we've got 12 people in all of LA that know that they're under nuclear attack. And of those 12 people, several have an idea to go up into the San Gabriel Mountains that are. Eric, I don't know why I'm looking at you. You didn't live there.
I did
Brian
not
lived
live
there.
Like let's go to California, or let's go to or not California. Let's
so
go to
their
Mexico,
escape
or-
plan isn't really well laid out. They all pile in a truck with a bunch of canned goods.
Yep.
And I think they're going to try to make it to an airport.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Right.
And they
helicopter to an
and
airport.
don't say which airport necessarily, but they're going to get out of the Miracle Mile, which
Right.
is the name of the film,
they-
and that's the area of LA that the La Brea Tar Pits and the cafe are in.
They ultimately decided to head to Antarctica, I believe.
Yeah, they wanted to fly a plane to Antarctica
Via the airport. Yeah.
Via the
Via
airport.
the airport, because
I'm not sure if they were kidnapping or
direct flights
hijacking a plane.
every day. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, during the film, he's running around. Anyone know how to fly a helicopter? I mean, it's like, really?
Well, what are you going to do?
Really?
You need
Yeah.
a pilot.
And then, of course, he goes into some rando gym, like very private-esque, ragey kind of like, what? It's got like, there's techno music and just like, I was like, this is like, and lots of sound effects that were very suggestive
Lots of spandex.
and a lot of spandex.
Well, in LA is a weird place at night. It's kind of magical, and this film captures that there are magical places to show up and be in LA at night
In LA.
because the city itself shuts down at 10, and any place that's open after that is kind of
Becomes a magnet.
is
For
a
the
magnet,
weirdos.
and it's weird. And the movie Collateral with Tom Cruise kind of captures the same feeling that, between the hours of midnight and 4 a.m., LA is kind of otherworldly.
Yeah.
And so he kind of makes that journey through to this gym, which is bizarre beyond bizarre. To it.
Well, even the
When
cafe.
I was 16 and I first saw this, that's just what I thought gyms in LA were like.
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
are.
And maybe they are. I've been to some gyms in LA. They weren't like that.
They weren't like
well,
that.
so-
And I'm not going to spoil anything.
But also then to say in this, even in the cafe where all of this begins, it's an eclectic group of characters
Yeah.
that are in this cafe
Right.
where
Yeah.
the journey begins, because there is what appears to be a stewardess who is not a stewardess. There's a transgendered person in 1988. And there's evidently some kind of lawyer or somebody who's whoever was at the bar. That the guy that was reading the newspaper, two street sweepers who have their own histories and their own personalities, and then this mysterious lawyer that the
It has this old brick cell phone
Right.
with a suitcase battery pack.
right, and who
She might
is-
be tied into national defense. We don't know.
We don't know exactly, but we do know that she was doing like, what was it, like a crossword puzzle and running stock options
She's a
at the same
very
time.
good multitasker.
Yeah,
Right,
right.
yeah.
So, but also too, like the two
was
street troopers were
Denise
comrades.
Crosby.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Denise
Denise
Crosby.
Crosby. Yeah,
Natasha Yar from
Yes.
Star Trek New Generation.
It's
Yeah,
possible
that's right.
she was actually Tasha Yar back in time, like happens from Star Trek in this movie. I'm just saying.
Quite
there was no
possible.
scanner. She'd have a scanner.
I guess.
So the one thing, like, so
hidden in the phone.
when he goes into the diner, so Earl Bowen is talking to the transgendered person, and he's like the doctor from Terminator, and there's a couple of people that also besides him are also in the Terminator, and I saw that as one of the trivia pieces, and I was like, that's really interesting. Like the homeless guy that's out front that has the dinosaur.
Who's the homeless guy in Terminator?
Well, so he doesn't play a homeless guy in Terminator. He's just an actor that happens.
So
to
is
be
this,
Right, but who does
this
he
is
play
like
in the
an
Terminator?
unofficial prequel to the
I
Terminator.
guess because it's like the end of the world happens, and the end of the world happens, and they're trying to prevent it. in the
Right.
other
So
movie.
this is
So
the first night of Skynet.
I was going to say, yes,
You're right.
Skynet. Right.
There you go.
Wow. It all ties together.
it is. It all is together. It all
But-
happens.
Could this have been set anywhere other than LA? Like, would the film work if this was Plano, Texas, or Omaha,
It could
Nebraska?
be New York.
Yeah, I agree with Eric. It could be New York because New York's got that kind of after hours magical city feeling. Anything can happen.
So, like Chicago or any city that's
Yeah,
big enough
Chicago.
to have kind of an overnight life.
Yeah.
Where I don't want to say like the interesting characters come out of the woodwork, but where there's a kind of a different culture that exists.
That exists
Kinda
between in the closing hours
from like 11 p.m. to
and the
5 a.m.
after hours.
Anywhere with a lot of liminal spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that diner that's kind of the focal point was actually something that existed. It was really there until the late 1990s, and then it just closed and sat vacant. But it was actually used for a number of films up until about 2013. And it's still there today. It's just not a functional building, or nothing's really happening there. It's just on the strip.
It's a movie diner.
Yeah. Bernie Sanders, back when he was running for president, used it as a headquarters.
What?
Believe
That
it
is
or not.
wild.
Weird trivia. I'm telling you, it's weird
But-
stuff in LA.
I
Where
don't
do you find
remember
that trivia?
I don't remember eating at that diner, but there were several like it. There was a diner chain called Norm's Diner, and they had 4 or 5 locations very similar to the one in the movie.
Yeah. And so to give some gravitas to what the woman who was sitting at the diner with the brick phone doing stocks and speed reading a novel at the same time, she said she worked for the Rand Corporation.
Yes.
And so the Rand Corporation actually has been a company that's been around since the 1940s
Yes.
and has been a part of the federal government's
they are a
nuclear defense.
They are a defense
initiative.
contractor. Yeah.
So it's quite possible. I mean, they tried to like make it more realistic. Like she probably does know people. If that was real and this was really happening, she could dial some people up and be like, "What the hell's going on?" And yeah, unfortunately, I mean, do we really want to spoil it? I mean, this is.
I just want to say that's maybe like the one believable moment of this entire 120 minutes.
Yeah, it's fairly
Like
unbelievable.
the rest of it's
fantasy.
so listener, I don't please don't misunderstand. I did enjoy this movie, but sometimes you enjoy a movie and you think the protagonist is such an idiot. And part of what you
He's
enjoy,
a trombone player in a band.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well, that's not the mistakes.
What a moron!
Right. But yeah, sometimes part of what you enjoy is you're like, oh, that was a stupid choice. And so like you enjoy the film and you're happy you're watching it and you think like every choice they make is the wrong choice. Like what's, you don't get like, yeah.
I would argue that the one right choice he made was to go after his true love. If you're a romantic,
Right.
he did make one right choice. No,
Right.
No matter what the outcome,
Yeah.
Right. He followed
he
his heart.
followed his heart.
Yeah. I don't know. How does this compare to other films from that era, from the mid to late 80s? I know that there was, we'll talk about in a minute, the soundtrack where there wasn't a single moment in the film that was quiet. So Tangerine Dream did the soundtrack, and
Yeah.
it was a continual, like an hour and a half of just background, techno-ish, electronica music.
I think, yeah, they would call it electronica in
Right.
that
So,
time.
so where this would fit is it was kind of where studios were trying to make indie films, kind of quirky, late 80s indie films.
Like experimental films more?
Yeah, like quirky films.
Okay.
To compare this.
To like Point Break.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
all right. Like, let's see. Pump Up the Volume with Christian Slater, where he's a indie radio jock.
Or Heathers. I
Or
always associate.
Heathers, or Insignificance, which was a film about one night with Albert Einstein in a hotel room.
Oh, fascinating.
I don't know that.
We should watch that sometime.
Yeah,
That sounds fun.
But,
There's
yeah,
a lot of interesting films that came out
There-
that year.
there
like
are-
Field of Dreams, Major League.
yeah. So not A-list actors, kind of B and C-list actors with a smaller budget,
Yeah.
and
Weekend at Bernie's.
Yeah,
Uncle Buck.
because they don't have A-list actors, they can take the chance on kind of a quirkier script.
Sure, there's less risk involved with such a large budget.
Right, not so they're only paying for the crew and the film, and they're not paying for A-list
Yeah.
actors.
Tom Cruise was busy with Born on the 4th of July, so he couldn't have been in this one because they were making that.
Yeah.
And Parenthood. There's some interest, like I said, interesting.
Yeah, so
B-level
these two
stuff come out.
actors are not your A-list actors. They're
No, not at all.
maybe C or D list.
But Anthony Edwards went on to do. He got very popular, didn't he?
He's in, both
Well,
actors.
he was
were in a lot of
part
stuff.
of the Brat Pack.
Yeah.
And he was okay, but he never was a Brad Pitt or a Tom Cruise.
No.
Or a Sly Stallone or Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnold, yeah. And so again, I think there's a lot to be said for. I want to touch on the approach to the filmmaking and the set. This was nothing was in a studio. This was, I don't even know, except for the very ending or the scenes where they're in the escalator, or were those done on a set, or do you think they actually? It seems like it was set driven from those small frame
like
perspectives.
on the elevator, you
yeah,
mean?
on the elevator.
That might have been a
soundstage.
a soundstage, but like the
All the building shots
the
and outside
diner was
stuff, yeah.
definitely on location.
Yeah.
The
Insurance company,
tar
tower
pits,
Yeah.
that was on location. The tower where the helicopter was, that was on location, so they could get the background of the city with all the city lights.
Mm-hmm.
That would be hard to do on a soundstage.
Was that smog or fog?
That was smog.
It was smog.
It's always smog in LA unless it's the day after a rain when it washes all the shit out of the sky, all the bad
Because I noticed that. I was like,
Particulates.
I can't.
particulates out of the sky.
The horizon is very hazy.
Yeah, that's LA.
LA. Yes.
It was worse in the 70s, but yeah, it was still bad in the 90s.
So thoughts on just like the continual use of music in the background and stuff just to carry the film along?
This
Because
seemed to annoy you, Dan.
it did. I wish there were some quiet parts
Okay.
because that would have added a lot of tension.
Well, what would for a quiet part you would want to hear about some of the characters' emotional journey, or
Yeah,
their
like in the
development?
elevator or in the helicopter at the very end. I mean, they know they're going to die, and there's this like boom, 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 boom going on in the background. I'm like,
No.
I'd rather have the tension of the quiet of just hearing the water splashing on them as the water of the tar pit.
It's like the
consumes
opposite
them.
approach to No Country for Old Men.
Yeah, where there's no music and,
Right.
and no soundtrack or anything. So yeah, I think the opposite extreme of some of the things we have seen, where there's been very minimal music used, or just whatever. Again, we've talked about this. So there's shots on TVs where the characters can hear and see the TV screen, and there's a couple of those where that occurs. Versus you have all this background stuff going on.
This
Where they don't
film,
hear
it was
that.
all score. It was nothing. It wasn't anything the characters were hearing. It was all score. I have an opinion on this, but I'm going to toss it over to Eric. What do you think?
I actually like it. For me, I think because it's Tangerine Dream as well, it lends it's atmosphere building to me, and I enjoy how it works in that regard.
I would actually agree with Eric. I thought it added to kind of the otherworldly magical moment between midnight and 4 a.m. when this film was taking place. Kind of the magic when the main character knew a secret
Yep.
and he was acting on the secret before the rest of the world found out.
And once they did, just broke all
Yeah,
the hell.
All hell, but I agree, but I do think, I mean, to Dan's point,
It also was overused.
It was
I
overused,
think once
yeah.
the rest of the world found out,
Yeah.
maybe they could have dropped the score
Yeah.
out. some.
right,
Yeah.
right, but
And that was also when Dawn happened, and you're
Right.
out of that space,
Right.
that magical
Right.
space. They could have cut it then.
yeah.
Yeah, because it's your time is limited. Either it's going to end, or it was all fake,
Or
And
you
if it
can
was
be
all fake,
proven
then
wrong.
and you can be wrong. So, but the simple fact that they did show stuff going across the sky, and they're like, "Oh, that's going to Mexico," and then they're like, "Oh, it's not. It's actually landing here nearby." The interesting thing is, the character went down into the sewer system, and I think we all talked about, he did. Oh, that's a great idea. You should go down there. You'll be safe for at least until you get either,
Radiated.
depending how far away you are from the explosion, either radiated instantaneously and die, or you'll get it from the fallout in a day. You'll just die from the radiation poisoning in a day. So it's like, pick your poison. It's like, do you like the one dude on top of I don't
Right.
think he wanted to get in the helicopter. He's like, I'm going to die anyway. I don't care. Let's just
Well,
party.
after what he did up there.
Yeah, I know. It's like half naked, and you're just like, oh, he was laying on a female. What the heck was going on?
He was no longer sober. He was not thinking clearly. We'll say that.
Is there an excuse, or is that just?
No, I think that
He
that
gave
explains.
into madness.
He gave into madness.
Well, he was already a dickhead, obviously.
Right.
he had
yeah, he
issues.
was coked up beyond belief.
right.
He seriously was. And so we asked, there were these two other characters that came pulling up and parked in front of the building. These two women who were like, oh, did you get the hollow points? I got the hollow points.
With
Did you get the hollow
Uzis.
points?
Who
With
had Uzis, yeah.
And I'm sitting here going like, okay, so she called a bunch of people who probably called a bunch of other people. I mean, we mentioned that.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like there's,
Right.
it's like once the word goes out that shit's going down.
And that would have
it
been an
spreads.
interesting metaphor as well. What
Yes.
happens if there's only 12 seats on the rescue helicopter and 200 people show up?
Well, I thought they were leading to that because we had
bunch of people
this
showing up.
cab driver and his cab driver's sister, and then we had the pilot, and the pilot had somebody that they wanted to save, and then we had all
And
this
also
stuff.
everybody from the cafe, but we never saw them again.
Yeah, no, they went to the airport.
I think they got saved. I think the helicopter's pilot, his partner got saved.
Yeah.
He dropped everyone off and came back as he promised
yeah.
and died with them.
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, he was already looking bloody before it went down,
yeah.
so he probably got hit by debris.
But he might have saved his partner.
Yes.
I think he did.
And that's
I
important.
believe that he did.
I don't think the partner was on the helicopter on the return
No,
trip.
I didn't see him.
It was
so.
just him, and it's sad. I mean, and Eric kind of told us when we started watching this, this is not a traditional Hollywood ending. This is something that, and perhaps that got out when this film was released, and people were like, I don't want to see a sad ending because this is a sad ending.
No,
Yeah, so this is a critic favorite, not so well loved by audience, the general audience.
I think the ending is to the movie's credit. I think it's better the way that it is. I can imagine maybe they shot an alternate happy ending,
Sure.
but that wouldn't have been as good of a film. This cascade of mistake and decision making and extra mistake, and then you see our protagonist becomes more and more anxious and less capable as the movie progresses. It leads just one direction, and the movie ends in the way that you expect it's going to end, just by seeing the decision that the protagonist is making. And
What's interesting is there's a older couple that are kind of star-crossed that get together at the end.
right.
Well, they haven't
And
spoken
they
to
make
each other
a-
for 15 years. That's were her parents.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That was,
they were separated for 15 years. They decided to get back together again,
Right.
and they made a different choice. They decided to not go all over the city. They decided to have a great last date.
Yep. Yep.
And maybe that was a good contrast with the protagonist.
I think so, because there is this struggle to live and this resistance against what's happening. And then it's juxtaposed against this acceptance. And I'm going to have this great pastrami sandwich, and I'm just going to enjoy it. And I'm going to enjoy being with this person.
And argue about the car every step of the way because that's what old people do.
I love that old couple.
And she wanted to go spend the last bit with him
I
too
know.
because she
And I
didn't know
think
any
that would have
better.
been a better choice for her in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, rather than this random guy she met,
Right.
10
Go
hours
spend it with your
earlier.
parents who
Like
just
a
got
few
back
hours.
together
Yeah.
and
And
have that pastrami.
So
and-
that would be interesting. And so alternate takes, alternate endings. Like how would that have played out? You're going to go anyway, or there's an option. There's a possibility you could go. And so what would you do? Would you make that choice? Would you say, I'd rather spend it with the people I've known longer?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I'm not going to Antarctica or wherever the hell else they're trying to go.
Yeah.
I am going to ground zero and I'm eating that pastrami, probably something with a lot of bacon.
Give me some pizza with pineapple on it, damn it.
I will take that.
I think we do have to recognize that our protagonist, Harry, completely undermines Julie's agency to make her own choice.
Correct.
He lies to
Yeah.
her the entire. He lies to a
He
bunch of
does.
people
He
the
lies
entire
to
way.
everybody.
He's
This fails the
controlling.
Bechdel test in a big way, I think.
Wait, I wonder, do any two female characters have a conversation?
No.
Yeah, the women with the guns.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. You're right, Eric.
And they're not talking about men.
Technically, it does pass the Bechdel
Yeah,
test.
but in a terror like
Spies.
so insignificantly.
And
Very,
I don't know.
that was
Does
like-
it count with the Denise Crosby's character? Because the men are very obnoxious towards her, but she's never talking about men or anything. She's a high-powered.
But
That's
she's not
true.
talking to another woman. She's
Oh.
not talking to
We
another
don't know
woman.
that, though.
Well, she talks to the waitress, doesn't she?
Well, she talks to the guy, the black gentleman who was the
she
main
certainly
restaurant
has
owner.
agency, and she's doing her own thing
Yeah.
the whole time.
And
Yeah,
the guy
right.
running the show at the diner knows who she is and is saying
Is subservient.
some
He
shit going
follows
down.
her orders.
He follows her
Exactly.
orders because he
Yeah.
knows who she is and is like, all right, I'm going to follow
Yeah.
you because you can save me. Yeah. So I think, I don't know. I think
I don't know.
simply
The
because of
hollow
the-
point conversation, though, does technically pass.
yeah.
the
It does.
Bechdel
It
test.
does, but the whole conversations between the two guys that are the street sweepers prior to that,
Oh,
I
yeah.
had that dream about her, and
Yeah.
then
she
he
did
just
everything.
talks
Yeah,
rude
right,
shit
right.
to her, and it's just like, really,
Right.
really, you make us guys look bad. Really, what are you doing?
Right. Right.
But that would be realistic, though, because I can
1988.
And they-
imagine
They
that's-
recognize, the
yeah.
people around them recognize those two are being assholes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm surprised the transgendered colored person didn't stand up and just throw some shit at him. Be like, "Bam, shut up."
Right. But maybe everybody just has to put violence aside when they go to Johnny's cafe.
I guess.
Leave
It-
your
it-
leave your
it-
guns at home.
It seems like a really interesting premise for a fun story if it would have gone different directions. I think there's room for spin-offs to follow, like what happened to the one group and what happened. Here's your TV show.
Yeah, you could have had all sorts of
It
spin-offs.
could have been Lost, the pre-Lost Lost.
It would be interesting as a Kurosawa film like Yojimbo, where they tell the same tale from 3 different perspectives.
Yeah.
Bad decisions, though. Some of them make really bad decisions. Like, I'm just
Sure.
going to run off and not take the
But
vehicle to
I'm going to
the
leave you while I
airport.
find the pilot, so I have to find you again and then go back to the aircraft.
Real
Yeah.
people
Right.
make terrible
is.
decisions.
Under stress. You're right.
People are terrible.
The dude pulls out a pistol and starts shooting through the roof of the car for some reason because somebody landed on his roof. Guy,
He abandons his car.
into the sewers.
sewer, and I'm just sitting here and fires just randomly into the sewer. I'm just like, do people really do that? Are they really that gullible and stupid and just make bad decisions because they're under stress and they think they're going to die? And this is why I'm just going to do
Well,
this.
as you become super anxious, your decision making capability becomes more limited. That's a true thing.
I think that he followed him into the sewer is weird. I get shooting at him on top of his car in that situation.
I'm not going to ride anywhere with you.
Well, just
How many
not,
guns do
not
you
when there's
have?
a nuclear war happening and you're on my car and I need to get somewhere.
And I'm stuck in Wilshire Boulevard
Yeah,
in a traffic
Mid
jam.
Wilshire, Miracle Mile. That's a
Yeah.
terrible place to be stuck.
Because there's
Right.
nowhere
In
to
a
go.
new-
There's
yeah.
no cross streets. It's nothing. You're just 3 lanes each way, and you're
I mean,
stuck.
again, as a teenager, when I first saw this, to me, like road rage in LA was a big thing back
Right,
then. So
yeah.
it seemed very realistic to me
Well,
as that people would do this in LA.
Eric, can I ask, how did this movie land differently with you now? Because you're watching it now, like 20
Yeah.
years after the first time that you saw it.
It wasn't as tense as I remember it. When I first saw it, I really felt that from that moment he gets the phone call, it was just like constant clenching, and I didn't feel that nearly as much this time. And there's a lot of little things that I had not noticed ever in 3 previous viewings in the 90s, which we can get into more later or now. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that there are some interesting points where that was a choice that was made by the director to leave things in that didn't necessarily need to be there. I did note that there were some shots in my head as we're watching it. I'm like, this adds nothing to the film. Why is it?
Some
Yeah.
things felt a little gratuitous.
Yeah.
I do kind of think like 1988, there were, I would say, like geopolitical tensions.
Oh, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and there was, I remember, in classes, you'd have this like duck and cover, and that
Yeah.
will save you from nuclear
Yeah,
bombs.
the
Get under
fear
your
of
desk.
nuclear war
Right.
was strong in me in the 80s.
Right.
So-
Well, I think in everybody.
Yeah.
And this film definitely, I think, ties into like that type of fear of mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
And what it would mean for the United States to face a nuclear attack. I feel like that's not as much part of the culture now. And I wonder,
because arguably we're closer now than we were. Then.
I know, which is weird, but it's not like a
Well,
state actor.
It went away when the USSR
Fell.
dissolved.
Right.
Yep.
And I think now with the ascendancy of Putin,
right.
we're in a
See-
similar area
yeah.
right now within the last year.
But
Wow.
Hollywood's not responding the same as it did.
Not yet.
Where I'm
Yeah.
going though is, for any person born after 1989 or 1991, after the wall
Yeah,
fell,
this
How
will
is this
be
film-
very foreign.
right? Is they're not going to remember what that Cold War feeling and what that underlying fear you always carried with you, what that was like.
Right. The premise of the film is going to feel
I
very
wonder if
odd.
the tension that I felt when I saw it back in the day is part of that. That fear was much more alive in me, so it felt more real.
I wonder. So, if you were to remake this film now, how would you change it? Like, would you? I do have a couple ideas, but I don't want to just filibuster or like jump in. So, if you were to remake this movie and try and keep its like original vision of trying to ratchet up the tension, and also tell this story of a star-crossed, in-love protagonist who's trying to be authentic and follow his heart. Part of this movie, I think, really depends on the context of what the fear of the Cold War instilled into its audiences. There was all this geopolitical tension for mutually assured destruction that everybody would have been aware of and thinking about in 1988. If you were to remake this movie for modern audiences, what would you change?
Might be biological
Yeah,
weapon.
it'd be biological or a dirty bomb. There's a film that just came out that was about a dirty bomb going off in New York, and just following like Cloverdale. Like, I'm just going to follow you with my camera, with my phone, as we try to escape New York or figure out what to do, because you can't go anywhere. I mean, it went off.
Yeah.
Like
It's going to hit everybody.
Be a verite crew with the main actor.
Yeah. You're just following him around. I mean, it's not the found footage thing because it's obviously staged and it's all written out. But that's the approach that I've seen.
Yeah,
I
the
don't
viewpoint through the phone, that makes sense for modern times.
So I would make the threat more specific. Maybe either China against Taiwan or North Korea finally going crazy, and the missiles are coming.
Because here it's sort of implied, it's going to be the USSR, but they don't actually ever say.
Well, it's also implied that we're doing a first strike.
It is implied it's a
Like,
preemptive
more than
strike.
implied, they say that
Yeah.
if it ever happened, the U.S. had to do a preventive strike. First strike.
But that's interesting to think of casting this as a part of a specific confrontation.
Well,
between-
and also more of a surprise.
So-
Rather than, hey, we did it first and this is retaliation. It's
India and Pakistan over Kashmir.
I think it would be more palatable as, oh my God, it's them against us.
Right.
And they struck first, and it's a surprise.
Right.
And you've got 50 minutes. What do you do?
Well, you could also ratchet up that tension of saying it's an ally of the United States, and then the question of, how do we respond to our ally?
I mean, that's happening right
Right.
now. I mean, the
Yeah.
stuff going on in Israel.
That's
like,
true.
And if Putin decides, regardless of the election, I mean, I've been
Well,
watching
and-
a lot of the
and-
news, and he's
and
just going to go right.
Ukraine, yeah.
There's now an alliance that's been formed under the not off the books, but like they're telling everyone, it's like
facto.
if anyone steps foot into Poland or any of those countries
Yeah.
that border Russia, it's going down. Like
Right.
they are going to full response, and they're not going to wait for NATO to do something. It's just they're going to respond.
right.
And they're going to use whatever means necessary, and it means dragging everybody in.
So what about cell phones and social media?
We'll know before it happens.
No, I mean in the context if you're remaking this movie, do you show how there's misinformation, how there's social media panic?
That'd be
I mean, that's
interesting.
the question. How much do people believe
Well, right.
it when they see it on
this
social
time,
media?
Yeah, AI
Gets
generated.
a cell phone call instead of a phone booth.
And it's
We're trying to reach you about your car's
And-
extended warranty.
Yeah. How does he figure out that it's legit?
Right.
Somebody sends him a video, or
Somebody-
he gets tagged on a video that's been posted to X or to
Right.
some platform.
Somebody sends him a video of a missile launching.
yeah,
He's accidentally copied on an email.
And actually, and
CC'd by accident.
that's
Right.
more terrifying than a wrong number, quite
Correct.
frankly.
Yeah.
right.
Somebody speaking Korean and says, "Hey, Dad, this is what I saw. It's headed for you.
And you
You've
run
got 45 minutes."
and you run it through Google Translate to understand the Korean.
and that starts the clock.
Yeah. Wow. And how would you know? You wouldn't be able to know because I mean
So-
NATO would know, but and the U.S. would know.
So, dear
But
listener,
would they
what-
tell you?
part of what we've glossed over is, through this movie, there's a couple of moments where there's these seeds of doubt that are planted, that our protagonist Is this actually happening? Did somebody prank him? Did he like misunderstand what the real message was? Is there really a bona fide attack? And so part of what's going on in this movie is what are the consequences if he's wrong?
Correct. And there's rioting going on. So later on, towards the end, it's starting to go down, and the newscasters are like, we don't know if this is true or
being
not.
shot.
They're just like on air, just tripping out, and like everyone around them is like, it's real, it's happening, it doesn't matter, we're all going to die, so let's just go out with a bang, which is kind of weird and sad. But that's what would happen. I think that there would be a lot of people who would just run around and do that because they're just crazy people with guns.
There were 2 people going out with a bang in the background of one of the shots that I did see. So
yes,
I
saw
some
that
of
too.
that too.
And so it's interesting because I'm assuming this is an R-rated film because there is brief nudity.
I never checked.
I think it must be. Yeah.
There's some language, but that's it. The violence is very controlled. There's
this could be shown on TV with only maybe 5 seconds edited out.
yeah.
However,
it's pretty
technically,
minimal.
this has the highest body count, I think, of any movie we've watched.
'Cause
it's
everyone died.
It's all of LA.
All of it. And what's funny is
We don't see the violence.
Right.
It's
Right.
implied.
I mean,
You're
it's
right.
more than LA if you want to go that right.
Yeah,
Fair point. Fair point.
I was sitting here looking at a political map recently, and there's more people in LA County right now than 45 other states in the United States.
Oh, I believe that. Yeah.
Combined? Or-
No, individually.
Individually.
Each state, like there's more people in LA County
Yeah.
than all these other states.
And
Because
their
it's like
entire state.
because it's
Idaho's
so
a low
big.
population state.
High
Oregon's
population.
a
Like
low,
all the
Very
Midwest,
Maine.
except for like maybe Texas.
and Minnesota. Well, Minnesota might. Well, maybe not.
I mean, there's like 20 million people in LA County, dude.
damn,
There's a lot of people in the county.
There's
I'm
a-
not talking the city. I'm talking the county.
it's a big
Yeah.
county.
Yeah, and then you talk about New York. I mean, it's like population densities. What would happen if this were to go on? How do you know? Or even like a big earthquake or a big natural disaster.
Right.
What impact does that have? I'm like, I'm not there, but it's obviously going to impact stuff because things originate that we see and hear and interact
Well,
with.
Ca-
It's going to impact the infrastructure.
California is the world's 5th largest economy.
But yes,
Yeah.
it is.
And half of that is in LA County.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about if that were to happen today, or how would that, like, again, the whole premise of like a dirty bomb going off. It's not going to necessarily kill a bunch of people initially, but it sure is going to screw everything up because that
Right.
radiation is going to spread and it's going to mess up a bunch of stuff.
It's so interesting. We were talking about remaking this a few minutes ago, and you guys were saying like North Korea, or I think I brought up like Pakistan and India. When I was asking that question, I was thinking for sure one of you would say, "Oh, it's like a terrorist organization that's going to blow up the city," and it would be
That was 2001's problem.
Yeah, that would
Yeah,
be
that's not today's
2001.
problem.
Today's problem is actually state
like
actors.
a rogue
Yeah.
state.
Yeah.
This is not rogue state anymore.
I guess I'm
This
behind
is-
the times. Okay.
Yeah.
Were you coming of age in 2001? I don't know how old you are. So,
So
so that's what's in your consciousness.
that's probably what I think about. Like,
Yeah.
that's the conflict I'm primed for. Yeah.
I know. Speaking of the riots, too, I'm thinking of the way it's depicted here, because we had shortly after the Rodney King riots, but that idea, I remember, I think in New York, there's that big blackout and people started rioting almost immediately. So that was also something that was in people's consciousness back then about how people behave when society gets a little wobbly.
The destruction of the social contract.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all for yourself.
But
And
you know
that's
what
they say.
brings people together after the destruction of the social contract?
Beer?
beer does.
Yes.
All right. So this is the time on the podcast we're going to switch over to talk about beer briefly. So again, we watched The Miracle Mile, which came out in 1989 or 88, based in 89. Really kind of interesting movie. I think this is a fun, quirky date movie that has a really weird ending. That's all I'm going to say, because it is not a happy ending. I mean, the two characters at the end, they die together, but it's like, that's
Spoilers,
really
Dan.
depressing. I mean, yeah, it's a 35-year-old movie. It's okay.
What does this have to do with beer?
So we were recently over at...
You can preserve stuff in beer.
You can ferment and grow old like you can in the tar pits.
Yeah, that's right.
We were over at Bottles and Cans over on North Greeley Avenue, and I was like, hey, we're going to watch this film. What do you guys have that might be interesting? And they had a couple of really good beers.
Did you literally ask the people?
No, I
that-
thought that internally in my head. I was like, what? And no, Eric
do you
was standing
recommend
there.
for my
Eric
movie?
was there, and I was like, what would go good with this movie we're going to watch? I was like, you know,
Yeah.
I literally scanned their cooler.
I was gonna say, don't terrorize the staff.
No, they were busy. They were doing a cider tasting. We actually went there for the cider tasting and then ended up getting some interesting Korean food that was okay. But definitely if you're in
Was
the
that
North,
Korean?
it was supposed to be Korean.
Korean food is always amazing, unless it's not done right.
It was a questionable Korean. It was an American
yeah.
version of Korean food.
Right.
So there's 4 carts or 3 or 4 carts there in their back area, and they have draft beer and cider and wine available, and they do events, and it's family friendly if you're into that. If you want something from inside, you have to actually go to the front of the business and go inside to get it. There's no direct route from the cart pod area, which is kind of sad. But we were there, we're hanging out, and I'm just like, all right, we had some food and had some cider, and I was like, hey, let's look to see what they have, because I do have some stuff in the beer fridge that is acceptable and good that would go with this movie, but I was like, let's get something different. I've had the Hetty Alice Gold Dot Fest or Oktoberfest beer previously. I thought this was an interesting, so I was worried a little bit about the simple fact that some of the beers that they have are at room temperature before they go into the cooler. And I don't know how long they've been sitting at room temp. So we've had this conversation many, many times, especially about buying beers at, say, a big place or a big shop like John's Marketplace, which has a lot of beer on the shelves.
But they
which
move their beer.
They
Or
rotate really
Costco,
fast.
or
Costco,
Fred
or
Meyer's,
Freddy's, anywhere
or-
that don't buy it off the shelf, buy it in a cooler. And
And especially don't buy it if it's near a cooler where the heat is exhausted.
onto
Right
onto
on
I
the
never
the-
even
can.
thought about
Yeah.
that.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The beer that's sitting on the floor in front of the coolers, that's the worst
Yeah.
beer you want to pick up. That's the stuff that's gone bad fast because it's got heat.
The beer is
Yeah, I
alive.
Beer's alive and it goes
is.
sour really fast. So the Fest beer from Gold, this is again a Gold Dot. So Gold Dot is the daughter of the gentleman who started, in my brain is failing
Gold's
me
Gym.
right now. No, I
Goldschlager.
feel really bad. Hetty Alice and is
You were
the
so
one
close.
one part of it. No, so it's Heater Allen. The Allen family, and it's the daughter and one of her friends started Gold Dot a few years ago, or about a year ago. They only distribute in cans and bottles in what they do in kegs. You can get it draft on site at their production facility. I would definitely check out anything that these guys do or that Hetty Alice does. So this is a Fest beer, which is an Oktoberfest. And is there some copy you'd like to share with us on this beer?
Though the road is long and filled with bends, may rise to meet you with beer and great friends.
All right. So out of McMinnville, this is
So
5.9%.
kind of an old Scottish blessing.
Yeah, sort of. It's a strong aromatic. We noticed that there was almost an off profile on the nose when we first poured it, and then
bathroom
flavor,
cleaner fluid.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
right.
seemed like there was a little bit, and that can come from heat striking and
Right.
just being at room temp a long time. It'll start churning, but I think we got it before it turned completely because it was just aromatics that were a little off.
There was some unpleasant aromatics, but once you started drinking it, like sometimes you can think of like these weird French cheeses that smell like gym socks,
Yeah.
but then when you taste it, it
They're
all
nice.
makes sense.
They're very lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think this is along that same line. So this is a little bit easier drinking than a Martzen, which is going to be a little darker in color, but a little bit more robust than a Helles, which is a light lager. There's a lot to be said for people who can make good lager beer, and this being one of them is, I think I've had this on draft and in cans before that were really fresh. I believe this is probably a month old. I was looking at the date on the bottom, and it says
So Dan, we've talked
liquid
about
bread 9/9/24.
So we've talked about the difference between brewing lagers and ales before a few times on this podcast, but as a refresher for newer listeners, lagers have a little bit more heat and maybe a little bit more activity that a brewmaster needs to do in order to brew a lager. Is that correct?
So so depending on the style of if they're doing a decocted lager or they're doing so lagering means it's a bottom ferment and not a top ferment. It needs to start at a lower temperature when you pitch the yeast, and it needs to sit at the 40 to 50 degree range for like 2 to 3 weeks.
But then it does get warmed up
And
later.
you can warm it up later,
Okay.
but you typically, depending on the style that you're making,
Okay.
you can raise the temp a little bit simply to get rid of some of the off flavorings that can occur, like
Right.
bacteria that's going to grow based on the temperature range that it's sitting at. Again, making lagers is tricky because you have to watch it. The temperatures is very specific. The yeast is going to live it and do really good at certain temperatures.
It's
and
sensitive.
It's way more sensitive than an ale. There's a lot to be said for people who can master the art of making lagers, and both Hetty Alice and Gold Dot do really, really, really good lagers.
So is this the reason that I don't usually like lager? I like this one though.
Yeah, so it's not very hop forward. It uses a traditional, I'm assuming, noble hop profile, which is going to be, the Fest beer is going to not be super strong in any kind of hop profile at all. It should just be really gentle, if anything, vegetal, and maybe a little bit of like grassy note, maybe. It shouldn't have much spice to it. That's going to be more of a Czech style, but this as a Marzen or a Fest beer style, it's basically the in-between. This is your medium light beer. Mm-hmm. And that's really all it's meant to be. When you see people at Oktoberfest and they're carrying around those giant Mosskrugs, that's not a dark beer. That's a lighter beer. And that's what this is. It's meant to be something you can drink a lot of. Now, this is 5.9%, which is probably a little higher than most Fest beers. Usually tend to be around 4 to 5%. You know, depending on how traditional you want to be. They're not doing Reinheitsgebot. They're not sticking to a specific recipe that's based out of Germany. I'm sure they're just modifying whatever they got based on their water profile and what ingredients they have available. But again, these two breweries do a really good job, and I applaud them for making a very drinkable and approachable Fest beer. Unfortunately, like I said, if you get something out of a can, and this is why I had us pour it into a glass ahead of time, because, I mean, if you're not going to smell it out of the can, you're not going to really get any aromatics if you're just smelling out of the bottle or the can. You might get a little bit, but pouring it out, letting the foam release those air molecules that you can smell, those aromatics.
Yeah, but this one, the aromatics were a little off.
Yeah.
So maybe that tactic didn't quite work.
Well, no, it did. I
Damn.
think that was sort of the heat struck starting to churn, but it hadn't. It was just those easy molecules that are going to be released first, which aren't really
if this
attached
was
to a lot.
Just canned perfect beer, you would want this in a glass
Yes.
so you could get the aromatics.
So you could get those clean aromatics, yeah, definitely. Yeah. And like I said, I've had this on draft and in can before, and it was absolutely just amazing. This, I think, was a little heat struck just out of the can because of those off aromatics, like cleaner fluid kind of approach. Not really chlorine, but kind of just cleaner. It didn't have a
one or
smell.
two steps towards that. I think.
Right.
Yeah.
It was not bad, but it was gonna go there.
Yeah.
And how did it go with the film?
I think it went really well. I mean, it was not distracting at all. I drank mine really fast because I was like, oh, this is interesting. Just the decision making and what was happening on the screen with the characters drew my attention way more than anything else. So a non-distracting beer.
It let us enjoy the jazz band the concert in the park that happened very early in the film. Yeah, so I agree with Dan. It wasn't obstructive, it wasn't distracting. And it was like during the happiest part of this film, Act 1.
I didn't know how we were going to pair beers with film, so now I'm learning things here.
Yeah, no, does it work or not? Did it distract you? I mean, what?
I don't know that I've ever been distracted by my beer.
Well, Eric, I'm gonna tell you when Dan first pitched the idea of the podcast, and then like when I was first invited here to partake, I was like, this is like synesthesia. Like you're describing the color of a taste, or something like, what's the smell of purple,
right?
But actually there's something to it, because we generally tend to agree if there's a beer that matches a movie really well, and I think some of it comes down to kind of cultural context. So like if we're watching kind of this Mexican Western and we're drinking Tecate, or we're drinking like another kind of Mexican,
lager.
That I can get.
It kind of works.
If you're pairing region of movie with region of beer,
and if we're watching something that's like set in winter and maybe really a cold climate, and we're drinking this like heavy chocolatey stout,
well, we didn't know what time of year this movie took place because it's L.A. and it's the same year round.
Yeah, we have no idea.
There was 58 degrees temperature.
So that's a little chilly.
It's a little chilly. I think it was during the winter time.
Might be.
Yeah.
So I mean, the idea is either
I would say, all right. So going on with the teachable moment, kind of a very distracting, heavy hop IPA would not work with this film.
No.
Agreed.
Because it's kind of a quirky, even though the subject matter is very heavy, it's kind of a quirky film, and so you don't want to be kind of distracted by what you're drinking.
Right.
Yeah. And you're paying attention to what's going on as you're drinking it versus paying attention to what's in front of you on the screen.
Okay.
Even though like some films are fast and there's a lot of dialogue, this is not a fast movie. This is very slow paced.
It builds tension.
It builds tension, and it's really, I mean, you seriously, I mean, like this is not a challenging film. This is a very basic script that has some interesting B-list actors that are doing an interesting job with what they've been provided.
Yeah, I think it's all about the characters, not
Right.
the plot or script too much.
I would, for me, I think a Hefeweizen.
Yeah.
For the first part of this movie, a Hefeweizen would be like kind of. It's not complicated. It's pleasant. It's easy drinking, and it's not going to distract.
Yeah.
Like,
but we did not have a Hefeweizen for the second beer.
we did not. We certainly
No.
did not. We had
Yeah.
something very different.
So moving on to beer number 2. Now the thing was when we were, I found online that there's some bad news at Mount Tabor Brewing, which has been around for quite a while, almost a decade or more. They do have a restaurant that's up in the Philida neighborhood of Vancouver, Washington. They have a tap room in production both in Portland and Vancouver, so they can distribute both in each state. The reason they moved to Vancouver out of Portland was so that they could distribute there as well, because otherwise they weren't producing enough to go into across the border. They're doing both. They were doing really well. I think their restaurant had interesting food. It wasn't high end. It was more like just a pizza hangout place. And Philida is just like northwest of downtown Vancouver, a ways north of Vancouver Lake. They, made some interesting beers. Some of them were really, really interesting and good. Some not so good. But they've closed. They sold, and they are no longer in production. So if you can find Mount Tabor beer here in the Portland metro area, and you're hearing this for the first time, check them. Seek out their beer.
This is a collector's beer.
This
y'all.
is so we have drank a collector's item. So checkered flannel brown ale. I have had this on draft at the location. I did have some previous knowledge as to, hey, this is actually a decent beer. Not many breweries are making American browns, which is what this is.
Right.
It is 6%. Aaron, is there any copy on there you would like to share with us?
There sure is. Autumn in the Northwest brings us crisp mornings, fall foliage, and Mount Tabor's checkered flannel brown ale. Brewed with this season in mind, this balanced, malty, and lightly hopped gold medal winning ale is a regular crowd pleaser. Go ahead, pull your favorite flannel out of the closet and knock back a crisp and tasty can.
Crisp. I would not describe this beer as crisp.
No, not at all.
No,
it's very
it's-
rounded.
Yep.
It does say it has 40 IBUs, which is interesting because that just speaks to, again, the residual alpha acidity, not necessarily the bitter profile, the flavor of the hops that they used. So this is another case of it doesn't matter what's on the can. It matters what's on the can, but you just need to keep in mind when you see that kind of information.
IBU does not translate directly
It
to
does
taste.
not. It does not at all translate to taste.
And everyone's palate is a little different.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one I thought it was like balanced and malty. I think that's absolutely fair, and I'd say kind of rounded. I almost thought like not quite like caramel-esque, but like kind of these
Brown
types
sugary.
of brown sugar flavors.
Hint of
The
maple.
word brown is well applied to it.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
Very roasty up front.
Very
I like-
comfortable beer.
I liked
Yeah.
this beer a lot.
I would drink this at 4 a.m. before Armageddon.
sure.
on the rooftop of an
On the
insurance
rooftop of
tower.
an insurance tower.
Yeah, right.
You know,
So do you see any kind of nut profile that shows up from the roast at all, like dark roasted nuts or anything along those lines? Because in the descriptions that I found, it does say that, and I did get a little bit of like a hazelnut kind of vibe on the back, but it wasn't like a sweet. It was more just like the robust.
I guess maybe it's there, but I think that for me, what I remember for tasting was really just more of the malt.
Dark
yeah, the
bread.
malt's very prominent.
Very so chewy, medium body,
Sure.
memorable to that extent. I'm just asking because it's like, to me, this was a very clean, traditional example of what American brown can and should be. It did not have a lot of, if you see browns and reds that like Leinenkugel comes to mind, that taste like burnt cardboard or old wet cardboard.
How dare you?
Those
sir.
are the ones you want to stay away from. Those aren't the good profiles.
I don't think I've ever tasted a cardboardy beer. Thank
I
God.
have had a few.
I don't think I've
Leinenkugels.
ever had Leinenkugel.
I've had Leinenkugels. I grew up on Leinenkugels, and Dan is trying to.
Heretic.
No, he's trying to provoke me. That's what's happening right now.
I'm poking the bear a little bit to see if he reacts. But yeah, I think from a brown ale, this did really nice. As far
agree.
as did it go with the movie? Do you guys have any thoughts on this beer other than it is a little roasty and not sweet?
It's not sweet. I mean, as I said, in the end part of the movie, I think it's fine. It's comforting. And so while you're watching all of this sad, terrible things happening, you have some comfort.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. I would say it's kind of like a
flannel overcoat.
similar to a kind of a cafe pot of coffee that's been on the burner for 6 hours.
Not as bad as the stout we had last episode.
It's not bad, but it's a comforting thing.
Okay.
It's not it's nothing you don't expect.
I mean, I don't associate flannel with LA. So
I
in that
don't,
setting,
but it was, it's like it's that time of year. And
Nuclear
again,
winter, Eric.
Well, okay,
nuclear winter.
after the bombs drop,
After
perhaps,
the bomb.
but
Yeah, I saw this and I wanted to really kind of grab it because I was like, wow, I don't think we've done any other Mount Tabor beers. We might have done one way back.
And now that they've been nuked,
Now
it's
they
time
no
to
longer
try it.
exist. They don't exist anymore. So now we can tell people to go try and find something that's not on the
Yeah.
market anymore.
Good luck.
Good luck finding it. But
Welcome
good
to
example.
Hipsters in a Beer. We've had the
Right.
beer that you can't have anymore.
Yes. And that's exactly what our profile and purpose is on this podcast, is to tell people about things they can't get where they are. Because, welcome to Portland.
It's like Fallout. You've got to go dig in the ruins to
Dude.
find it.
Yeah.
Find this beer.
So I want to say 4 thumbs up on this film. Check it out. It's probably out there on a streaming platform somewhere available. If you can't find it,
Yeah, it's
find some
always
friends that
fun
can
to
find
get
it for
it
you.
kind of a studio indie film.
Yeah.
Because it's a little outside of the norm. It's interesting.
Yeah.
It doesn't follow a standard plot.
It
What-
does
It's
not.
worth seeing.
I just want to say, Eric, thank you for recommending this film to
You're
us.
welcome.
It completely passed my notice in 1988.
that's
Which most movies did, but also even ever since this Miracle Mile was not.
it's
something
not
that-
well known.
and I don't think I ever would have found it had you not mentioned it and brought it up for the recording tonight.
Yeah.
And dear listener, I think we got 4 thumbs up on this. I'd recommend it. If you've got a younger viewer in the house, be prepared to explain older technology.
Like,
Yes,
like
payphones.
phone booths.
Phone booths
Phone
and
booths.
payphones and so children appropriate. There is one scene of slight nudity, but it's passing by really quick. Language is not really an issue.
I guess some threats of gun violence,
Some
but
threats of
not
gun
like threats
violence,
gun
but
violence,
I mean,
yeah.
not anything you haven't seen already on
There's
TV.
a few people who die by gun violence.
Yeah, but
And
Yeah,
there's
but
the-
not
so
on not
minimal,
on
though.
Incineration.
Not on camera.
Yeah, in the end, I
camera.
mean, it's
Yeah.
sad. I'm like, so how do you describe to your children that everyone's dead because a bomb went off? I mean, yeah, so that's kind of interesting. If your children or your kids are age appropriate to understand that already and know what that is,
Right.
and can ask questions about that, and that would be a good conversation to have. Like, yes, that can happen, but we don't really have that threat anymore. But it still exists.
Oh no, we do.
yeah,
Yeah, we have the
it
threat.
does. It is there.
Maybe
but
not quite this threat, but
It's
in
up to the
movie.
parent to reveal what's going on.
There you go. Do you
But
want to give the
also-
secret away?
Probably a good chance, maybe as a parent, to like have that conversation of what was it like when you were alive in 1988, if you're a parent old enough to be alive in 1988. But what was it like to grow up in the Cold War? What did that mean? How was that different from
Well,
what
and,
your kids
and,
have
and also a
experienced?
good discussion of at the end, what has most value in life? Do you want to die with your beloved,
Right.
or do you want to die struggling to survive?
And also, how do tar pits work?
Yeah,
Right,
because
very
that didn't look
important.
very tar pity to me.
What-
That's all I'm going to say.
The La Brea tar pits do not look tar pitty. It's a lake.
It's a lake.
Yeah, a lake with a mammoth statue in it.
It looked just like it was on the film.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I know. Knowing's half the battle, and now I don't have to go visit it in LA.
I feel like I've been marketed to. It's not a real tar pit.
I know, right?
It's a
Well-
lake. I've seen those.
That area, if you dig a couple feet down, it gets tarry in the soil.
Okay.
But there's grass over most of the tar.
So for him to have been standing over it, smoking a cigarette, that was okay.
That's
like you didn't have to
fine.
flick the cigarette into the water and it wouldn't have caught fire.
Probably not.
All right. Even though there was bubbling gas and stuff coming up.
There's some methane bubbling in the lake.
And methane just like explodes when it hits fire. But
Yeah,
that
but
doesn't
methane dissipates in the air.
I know.
It's like a cow fart, Dan.
I know.
This is science in a beer, everyone.
Yeah, it is. All right.
Cow fart in a beer.
So and we have been most of us sipping water since we've subsequently started the podcast. So even though Blake is not here, we're going to suggest always partake in a little bit of water while you're out there.
Just for
watching your
Blake, I'll say
phones.
if you don't hydrate, you'll dehydrate.
All right, so there it is, and as of course the opinions expressed during the taping of this recording are those of the hosts, And we want to thank you all for hanging out and chilling for an hour or so with us while we talk about this interesting film, Miracle Mile. And check out some interesting beers. If you can find something local, do that. And if you can't find something local, find something that's not offensive. Because I think this film deserves an attention. You shouldn't be distracted by what you're drinking.
Agreed. Thank you for joining us, listener. This is Aaron signing off. And until next time, get your helicopter's license because you never know.
You never know. You might
Good
need it.
advice. Oh, do I have to sign off? All
Oh, we all
sign
Say
off.
farewell.
Yeah, this is my first time. Well, then, thanks for having me, guys. I enjoyed it. And dear listeners out there, hi and bye. This is Eric signing off.
Hey, everyone. This is Brian. Thank you so much for listening.
So take care, everyone. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode.